The main character, a blue-eyed blonde, slightly embarrassed, bent down in front of the handsome dark-haired gentleman and said that she wanted him to love her for a year. The girl added that this was a good deal for him because in exchange she would use her magic, which allows her to predict the future. The man whispered to the young lady with a smile that it was very sweet, which made her cheeks blush, then said that he accepted her proposal. Then, the protagonist, choking from coughing, realizes that she has to pay for this magic with her own life, but the master does not need to know this. The main character is confident that she would prefer to live life to the fullest, even if it is only for 1 year. Clearing her throat, the lady glanced at her palm and saw blood on it. For her, this man named Enoch was a means to an end. But the more time they spent together, the more she began to appreciate the bright moments in life and began to want more. One day, Enoch, approaching a girl who was sitting on the bed in just a nightgown, said that he would do anything to kiss her now. Before the madam could answer him, the young gentleman laid her on the bed and hovered over her. The protagonist looked at him with embarrassment, and the man asked with a smile, if this is what people call love. The girl closed her eyes and sighed when the brunette, leaving a wet mark with his tongue on her neck, asked if this was the love she wanted from him. Enoch, in one movement, baring his muscular body, asked his beloved to tell him that she now wanted the same thing as he did. The lips of a man and a girl are intertwined in a passionate kiss. The heroine doesn't want this magical spell to ever end. However, the protagonist wondered if they would soon lose this moment forever. The main question before her was when her magic would stop working. The main character's mother died when she was 9. The day of her funeral was rainy, and father and daughter stood before the coffin under an umbrella. The woman's death occurred on a stormy winter night, and she fell asleep by an open window and died of hypothermia. The father, without taking his eyes off his wife's coffin, told the child that she needed a new mother. And right after the girl's mother was buried, her father introduced her to her stepmother, who turned out to be a very unpleasant person. That's how it all began. From that moment on, the protagonist named Elenoya Lopez became an outcast in her own family. 20 years have passed since that day, and a girl's voice calls out to the grown-up heroine, who had not listened to her because she was lost in thought. Ellen's stepsister, a girl with red hair and green eyes named Helen, asked her why the dress was in her closet. Another stepsister, Melissa, asked her not to tell her that she didn't want to attend the spring formal, and her stepbrother said that if she went, she would be a laughingstock. Elenoa stood silently, thinking that her father had bought her this dress on one of his business trips, and that this was his first and last gift. Stepmother Margot Lopez, who was relaxing in a chair with a cup of tea, told her daughter that she had a lot to do on the day of the ball and did not need to attend. Although the girl's fingers trembled, she told her stepmother that she was right and would not go to the ball. The heroine recalled that she had come of age long ago, at 21. She had entered high society only once, at 18, when she attended her debutante ball. Helen told her sister that she would take her dress, since she was not going to the ball anyway, otherwise it would just rot in her closet. Illinois agreed with her, then sighed, sadly thinking that the same thing always happened. One day, the protagonist, along with other cooks, was preparing dinner. She's an ordinary kitchen maid, covered in ash. Illinois never dreamed of attending a formal ball, being an abandoned daughter. Many people think that she is her father's illegitimate child, but she is actually the legitimate daughter of Baron Lopez. The girl was cutting ingredients, but suddenly another cook snatched the knife from her hands. The servant sheepishly told my lady that they would sort things out themselves and that she could go and rest a little. The protagonist looked down in embarrassment and told the maid that she would do as she advised. But suddenly, she noticed the contemptuous glances of the cooks. There is a reason why everyone in the estate looks down on her, which her father simply ignores. The main reason is her late mother. One day, Eleanor overheard two maids talking about how she would only bring bad luck because her mother was abnormal. The main character was overcome with sadness when the girls suggested that she might pour boiling water on them again, as her mother once did. The maid, when Madame poured hot tea on her face, screamed in pain and fell to the floor, while her friend rushed to her aid. The little protagonist, trembling all over, asked her unwavering mother why she had poured boiling water on the girl's face. She, having humbled her daughter with an empty, lifeless look, calmly said that she dared to have a name similar to hers. Elenoia, passing by her mother's portrait and carrying a tray with her dinner, thinks that it was not about love. Her mother simply considered her her property. Poor Ella continued to work in their palace with a scar on her face. As a child, the heroine overheard her saying she believed in karma. The maid said she hoped that what the lady had done to her would come back to her daughter doubly. She would be abandoned by the man she would love. The heroine thinks Ella might be right. Her father shows no interest in her, and she feels like the ugly duckling in the family. Then the girl is pulled out of her thoughts by a black cat named Lucy, who began to rub against her leg in search of affection and attention. Eleanor stopped at a slightly open door, put down her tray, and bent down to pet the fluffy kitten. She told the kitty he was a cutie and the only one in the house who loved her. But then Cinderella overhears a conversation between her sister and her friend about whether she knows who is going to come to the upcoming ball, the Duke of Bayern. The main character asked the cat to be quiet so that she could quietly eavesdrop on the girl's conversation. Helen told her friend that she was going to meet his lordship, but she was very nervous because they said he was very handsome. The protagonist reflected on the fact that even she had heard of the Duke of Bayern, even though she rarely appeared in high society. Enoch Bayern Friedrich is a prince of the Friedrich family, rulers of Frieden. He is a war hero and ruler of the northeastern lands of Leinfelden. Iris Philowain, a friend of Eleanor's half-sister, shared that Lady Penelope would soon propose to His Highness. Helen had been pining for Enoch for a long time, so she asked if it was true, since Penelope was rumored to be engaged to someone else, and she said that their families were in talks. The heroine decided to go further, listening to how the red-haired woman was not satisfied with the fact that the entire kingdom revered Penelope, although she was more beautiful than her. But the girl froze when she heard Iris ask if Eleanor would be attending the spring ball this year. Philowain added that the protagonist was boring and gloomy, rarely leaving the estate. Harton asked why she would be at the ball. Lady Lopez heard her stepsister say that she was just a lowly maid who didn't even have a dress to wear. The main character, clenching her jaw, moved on, not wanting to hear how Harton washed the bones about her mother. She and the cat came to her room, which, unlike the rooms of her other sisters, was shabby and old. Milady sat down on the bed, thinking that she would not find peace and quiet in this house, and it seemed to her that everyone was excited about the upcoming spring ball. But suddenly, Lucy brings her a newspaper and an envelope containing a letter from the king, where he officially invites Elena Lopez to the spring ball, which will take place at the Avon Palace on Friday at 8 p.m. Plopping down on the bed, the main character thinks that she was sent this invitation because she is the daughter of a marquise, but she doubts that she will go to it. In any case, she is interested to see whether the Duke of Bayern will be present and whether he is as handsome as in this newspaper and as Harton says about him. The protagonist decided that she shouldn't make fun of her sister behind her back, since she, too, was enchanted by Enoch's appearance when she saw his portrait. The girl got out of bed and looked at the luxurious dress that was located on a mannequin in her room. The heroine thought with embarrassment that she had already forgotten that she had sewn herself a dress for the ball, but decided to try it on a little. After putting it on and doing her hair in a simple style, Eleanor looked in the mirror and declared that it looked absolutely beautiful. Warren Nobert, Enoch's friend, looked at his watch after talking to him and cried out that he had to go already because he had a date with Mercedes. The Duke, watching him, thinks he himself doesn't want to marry, doesn't even want a long life. The peasant believes that love and marriage are only for fools. Smoking his pipe, he convinces himself that love affairs are for those who have too much free time, but for him it means nothing. Meanwhile, the stepmother tells her stepdaughter that she should have brought the laundry from the laundry, to which she says that she does. The woman then asked the already busy heroine if she had finished her housework, and the girl said no. The stepmother sighed with displeasure and asked her daughter why she was doing everything so slowly. The spring ball is today. Helen and Melissa are already busy preparing for this important event, but the protagonist was busy with housework. She apologized to her mother for being so slow. Eleanor, of course, didn't have time to prepare with such a schedule, but she had her own plan. Meanwhile, at Bayern Palace, a disgruntled Warren asks Enoch if this means he is not interested in getting married this year. The guy angrily reminded his friend that he was already 25 years old, and it was time to think about marriage, especially since all the ladies were in love with him because he was still single. He explained that, because all the girls are in love with him, it is difficult for other bachelors to find brides for themselves, so they are angry with him. Then the friend said he knew what the problem was. His Majesty was eager to marry off his younger brother. Warren suggested that at this rate, He would have to marry not for love, but for convenience, to which Enoch remained silent. But then the Duke said that Penelope was ready to enter into a contract marriage with him. The Marquis asked if he meant Saint Penelope, then said that he did not consider her a dreamer, and that contract marriage only happens in novels. Nobert asked his friend not to say that this beautiful girl was so in love with him that she blushed next to him. He rolled his eyes and thought that she didn't seem to be in love with him at all, because she had such an expression on her face, as if she hated him. However, the Duke said with a grin that Penelope was clearly dreaming and simply obsessed with romance novels. Warren irritably told his friend that it was time for him to start eating a proper breakfast, and not just smoking a cigarette, because at this rate he would die early. Meanwhile, the stepmother told her stepdaughter that once she finished her chores, she could come to the ball. She thought she could very well make that happen. The woman slapped the servants, giving the order that they were freed from work, telling the heroine that at this rate she would never be able to come to the ball. Eleanor thought furiously that she would have everything done before her stepmother even looked back. Then her sisters, who were getting ready for the ball, walked past her. Mom, not paying any attention to the heroine, told the girls that they both looked charming, as always. But as soon as the protagonist looked at this charm, she and her cat almost lost their jaws from shock. The girls were adorned with glittering jewelry, their dresses were the latest fashion, and their hair was braided and also adorned with beads. Eleanor thought with horror that they looked too fancy. Helen asked her mother if she looked good, as the feather decoration was quite heavy, and her mother said that they should do everything to stand out. The mother sternly reminded her daughters not to forget to smile when they met the gaze of gentlemen, as they were to be married by the end of the month. The heroine, continuing to clean, remembered that Margot had been trying to marry off her girls ever since they debuted last year. Their family is too poor to provide a decent dowry, so it will be difficult for the Lopez sisters to find a husband from a wealthy family. But suddenly, the protagonist and her pet flinched at the mother's scream. The woman furiously asked Melissa why she was wearing those ribbons. The mother told her daughter that her features meant she should wear bright colors. She said she thought these would go well with her dress. Hearing this, the stepmother, with frozen horror on her face, asked the girl how she dared to talk to her like that. Margot then scolded Elena for taking too long to clean, adding that everyone in the house irritated her except her beloved son. Ellen continued to wash the floors in silence, and the angry mother ordered her daughters to quickly go to the carriage. But the heroine remembers that her beloved Anthony is most likely mired in debt from gambling, but his mother either doesn't know this or turns a blind eye to it. Suddenly, the worker, looking at her watch, cried out she had to do everything before the clock struck 10 because she really wanted to put on the dress that she had sewn herself. Time passed, and Eleanor exclaimed joyfully that she had finally done all the housework. Looking at her watch, she realized that it was already 15 minutes past 10, and if she got ready now, she would be able to enjoy the ball for a little while. Inspired by the upcoming event, the girl went to get ready, promising herself that she would do everything to get out of this house. Soon Cinderella, dressed in her luxurious dress, appeared at the palace where the spring ball was taking place. She couldn't take her eyes off such an exquisite building, because she had lower expectations and just wanted to escape reality a little. While enjoying the celebration with a glass of champagne, the lady thought that she had never imagined that balls could be so exciting. But suddenly, Helen, standing nearby, noticed the protagonist. The girl wondered if it was her sister, as they looked alike. However, Madame decided with a sneer that it could not be Eleanor, since she could not possibly finish all her business and come to the ball. Here the main character noticed that some kind of commotion had started among the guests, and began to monitor everything to find out what was going on. It turns out that Duke Enoch Byron himself showed up at the ball and was solemnly introduced by the announcer. All the ladies present began to admire how handsome this gentleman was, and Cinderella, among others, thought that he was even more beautiful in person. The heroine was so engrossed in looking at the man that she noticed him directing his gaze in her direction. The girl immediately turned away, embarrassed that their eyes had most likely met. The young lady was so embarrassed that, as she walked away, she didn't even notice how she stepped on a man's foot with her heel. Turning around, she saw a gentleman of venerable age, who was surprised by the unpleasant situation with a smile. The main character immediately bowed to the sir and apologized for her clumsiness, but he said that she had nothing to worry about. The man, with an annoying smile, told the young lady that his name was Anderson, Then, calling Elena, his little flower, asked her name. The protagonist felt uncomfortable being in the company of this gentleman, and she hurried to leave, but he grabbed her hand. The ball guests began to watch as an adult man held Miss Lopez down and questioned her about her family. The frightened heroine asked Anderson to let her go, but he, getting menacingly close to her face, said that she had dressed up for the ball, and it would be a shame if everything went to waste. But suddenly, the girl's patience breaks, and she abruptly pulls her hand away. However, the lady did not take into account that she moved too forcefully, which caused her to lose her balance. Suddenly, a man stopped the unfortunate woman from falling, grabbing her by the shoulder with his hand. It turned out to be Duke Enoch himself, who told the girl that he had finally found her. Anderson stared at Elena and Byron in shock, while the gentlemen around him began to whisper as they looked at them. Taking advantage of the moment, the Duke whispered to the stranger that he had been looking for her everywhere. As soon as the main character turned around, she saw that she had been saved from falling by a man whose appearance she was crazy about. Enoch asked the lady if she had calmed down, and she said yes, after which she bowed before the gentleman and thanked him. However, the young man suddenly asked what she was thanking him for. She, taken aback by such a question, asked the gentleman what he meant. Sir Anderson was shocked when the Duke asked the girl not to tell him that she would have preferred that man instead of him. The elderly Earl became even more angry when Lady Lopez, looking at him, told Enoch that she would not like to spend time with him. Then the Duke, extending his hand to Ellen to invite her to dance, asked what she was waiting for in that case. At that moment, the protagonist felt the intense gaze of those around her, their hatred, surprise, and even curiosity. However, looking behind the young master, she thought that it was not only that. Her stepmother and stepsister watched her with disgust. Eleanor could literally see the anger flashing in Helen's eyes. Cinderella wondered what would happen if she offered her hand to a man, or, on the contrary, refused. Everyone would be shocked in any case. The girl realized that no matter what choice she made, gossip would spread about her. Deciding that she would be a cause for scandal in any case, the main character extended her hand to Enoch and said that it was a great honor for her. The Duke and Miss Lopez, along with other couples, twirled in a graceful dance. Eleanor, occasionally glancing at the gentleman's face, understands that there is absolutely no emotion in his eyes, and it does not seem that he is crazy about her. At that moment, when his lordship spun his partner around and launched her, holding her by the back, the heroine realized that he didn't even know her name. After dancing a waltz, the man and woman bowed to the other guests. The latter thought that everything now seemed unreal to her, as if it were a midsummer night's dream. The protagonist then turned to the Duke, but he immediately walked away from her without saying a word. Cinderella sadly remained standing in the middle of the dance floor, deciding that Enoch really wasn't interested in her. The lady, her cheeks flushed and her hand pressed to her chest, wondered why he had done that to her. But then the girl turned around and saw that her stepmother and stepsister had approached her, looking at her with very suspicious eyes. Harton pointed angrily at her sister and called her a sly little fox. The main character watched in fear as her mother suddenly grabbed her daughter's hand. She, without taking her eyes off Ellen, whispered that now was not the time for a showdown, and she could take revenge when they returned home. The protagonist turned and walked away without saying a word. She hoped this wouldn't happen. The girl decided to go out onto the balcony to get some fresh air. She believes this spot is the best place to hide. Suddenly, Miss Lopez realized that today had been a rather strange day for her. She had been lucky enough to ride in a carriage and waltz with a man she had only admired from afar. Looking at the night sky, the lady wondered whether it was luck or, on the contrary, a trap. And not only that, Enoch Byron seemed to Cinderella to be the embodiment of God, majestic, proud, and beautiful. Eleanor realized she felt a little jealous, even though she shouldn't have. The Duke is very different from the main character, who was abandoned by her own father. Suddenly, the balcony doors opened, and Enoch and a richly dressed man entered. The latter asked the Duke if he really didn't care. The protagonist, quickly hiding behind the wall, wondered in surprise what his lordship had forgotten here. Enoch grabbed his head and asked why everyone was so worried about his marriage. The blond man told his friend that he was already past the age when people get married, to which the Duke, calling his interlocutor brother, said that he was only 25. It dawned on the main character that if he called that man brother, it meant that he was Henry Friedrich, the king of the kingdom of Frieden. Henry told Enoch that he himself had married at 20, but Enoch asked why he should even look for a wife and start a family. The king asked his brother who the lady he had danced with was, saying that he had asked him to talk to the girls, but thought that he had not listened to him. Eleonora, still hiding behind the wall, turned around and strained her ears. The duke replied to his majesty that he did not know who the girl was. He asked if that meant he had danced with a stranger. But suddenly, Enoch, whose face twisted into a sly smile, said that he decided to ask that lady to dance only because he felt sorry for her. The main character's eyes widened in shock when she heard these words. The king asked his brother if he danced with her out of pity, then said that he knew for sure that he did not do good deeds without a reason. He chuckled and said that he was just feeling merciful, and it was funny to watch the lady get scared and shake. Henry told Enoch that he could be very mean sometimes and asked him if he could say it in a more gentle way. However, the duke retorted that he was simply telling the truth, causing Eleanor to hang her head in dismay. As she sank to the floor, she realized why his lordship had not even bothered to know her name. He had not considered her worthy. He had only been merciful to her. The protagonist recalled the moment when, while cleaning her room as usual, she overheard Harton talking to her friend and asking if her bracelet was pretty. She replied that it was. The girl said that she thought so, and then didn't even notice how she touched the cup on the table with her hand. The dishes fell to the floor and shattered into a pile of pieces, and the water that was in them spilled across the floor. Upset by this embarrassment, Harton called out to her half-sister and ordered her to clean up the mess. Eleanor obediently leaned towards the broken cup, while Iris, who was sitting on a chair nearby, looked down at her. Miss Phelan watched as the main character, bent over the floor, silently and painstakingly cleaned up the remains of broken porcelain. But suddenly, she decided to ask Cinderella why she lived like this. The unexpected question made Cinderella look at the girl and ask what she meant. Iris, calling the worker poor thing, said that she should look for a suitable husband to leave this place. Eleanora's fingertips trembled as she recalled the incident. She thought she'd gotten used to all the ridicule, but every time it hurt her deeply. The girl wanted to get to her feet, but accidentally tripped over her own shoe. The main character fell painfully to the floor, letting out a short but loud, frightened scream. Looking at her bare foot, the lady thought that it hurt so much that she seemed to have twisted her ankle. But suddenly, the men who were on the balcony, hearing someone's voice nearby, asked if there was anyone else there. Cinderella, hiding back behind the wall, covered her mouth with her hands, hoping that she would not be caught. Just as Lopez was pondering what to do, a loud bell rang. She realized she had an opportunity to escape, but after thinking for a long time, she ran through the empty corridors of the palace and found herself on the street, where she immediately rushed to the carriage. Out of breath, Eleanor approached the coachman and said that she needed to get to the Heverington 11 urgently, after which she handed the man some of the money and promised to pay the rest as soon as they arrived. The protagonist got into the carriage, after which the taxi drove off to the designated address. Cinderella rode home in a bad mood, with a broken ankle and a lost slipper, but she begged herself not to dwell on it. Meanwhile, Enoch was walking around the palace as usual, thinking about how loud the bells had sounded. Stepping onto the same balcony, he instantly realized someone was there. He sensed their presence, but didn't bother to look. Suddenly, the Duke's boot stumbles upon an unusual find, a slipper of a soft blue color. Enoch, looking at the item with a serious expression, concluded that the culprit was a lady. He suspected it was a maid or a woman from a troubled family. But then Mr. Byron thought about the fact that the girl with whom he danced the waltz had the same shoes. Then the king appeared on the balcony and said that no one was found here. Suddenly, Enoch smiled at him and called him "dear brother." He immediately became agitated and asked what he had in mind for addressing him so kindly. He, with the same grin, asked his brother if he could pick this thing up for him, pointing his finger at the shoe lying on the floor. The king clutched his head wearily and remembered that Enoch had misophonia, a fear of contamination, and he always wore gloves when he left the house. In the event that he needs to shake hands with some gentleman, he also does not take off his gloves at such moments. The Duke also never wears the same pair of gloves twice. He simply throws away the old ones. But Henry was infuriated that even now his brother had the audacity to ask the king to lift something for him. Enoch merely shrugged indifferently and told the king that he was, in fact, his brother. The ruler sighed in disappointment, giving up on trying to persuade the Duke. The Duke added that he would eventually do what he asked. Picking up the shoe, Henry asked his friend if it belonged to his girlfriend, to which the friend asked if it looked like it could belong to someone he knew. As he was about to leave for his business, the dark-haired gentleman asked his brother to throw away the shoes, which completely stunned him. Turning to the king, Enoch added with a sly smile that they both did not want any rubbish in Evan's palace. The king, having carefully examined the slipper, thought that if his guess was correct, then he knew to whom it might belong. The main character's personal room was still in its shabby state, but now there was only one of her shoes in it. The stepmother, having watched Eleanor wash the floors, irritably asked her if this could be called cleaning. The girl didn't answer her, and the mother suddenly slapped her daughter hard in the face. The worker was very frightened and put her palm to her burning, reddened cheek. To top it all off, the stepmother also stepped on my foot with her toe, crushing it painfully. Smiling ominously, the woman told Cinderella that she could consider it karma for daring to covet something she didn't deserve. She added irritably that his lordship had only danced with her out of pity. Mamma reminded her stepdaughter that she had been wearing a worn dress ever since she attended the lavish spring ball at Avon Palace. Madame asked the girl why she had disgraced Count Anderson so much, then explained that she should apologize to him like a true lady. The stepmother angrily asked Eleanor whether she would be willing to take full responsibility if he filed a complaint against their family. The protagonist, remaining silent, looked away. She understood her mother's true intentions. The heroine said that she would send Anderson a letter of apology, to which the woman said that it would be better for her, and that she and Harton would soon leave. As she left, the stepmother nudged her stepdaughter in the shoulder, adding that she needed to clean up the second-floor hallway while she was gone. Cinderella said that she would do so, looking at the mistress of the house with a devastated look. As it was getting close to sunset, Melissa called out to Elena, who asked what was going on. She, holding a book in her hand, shyly admitted that she wanted to ask her for a favor. Cinderella asked what it was about, and her sister said that the thing was that her mother asked her to return the book to the royal library, but she was busy at the moment. Melissa smiled sweetly and told the worker that she would be grateful if she would take the book back to the library on her behalf. However, the heroine felt something was wrong with this because Helen always asks her for favors, but her sister does not, so it seems strange. When Eleanor asked if there was a reason why she could go herself, the girl with the book trembled excitedly. The heroine showed her anger to her sister by looking her straight in the eye. She asked her to be honest and why she was asking for a favor. She said that she really needed to take care of something urgent, then asked if she could do it, adding that it was not much to ask. The protagonist explained that it was an hour's walk to the royal library and that she wouldn't call it a simple favor. Melissa sheepishly asked the girl if she could call a carriage in that case, especially since it wouldn't cost much. Eleanor lowered her head and fell silent, and her half-sister said that she did not look happy, after which she asked what was wrong. The heroine sadly confessed to the lady that she did not have a penny because her mother took everything she had from her just because she dared to dance with the Duke. Suddenly, Cinderella, turning her gaze back to her sister, saw that she was barely holding back her demonic laughter. Melissa, looking at the worker with a wild smile, was surprised that she had just called the mistress of the house her mother. Eleanor began to suspect that something was wrong, and looking around, she saw that her stepmother and Harton had been standing in the doorway all this time. The woman's furious gaze mingled frighteningly with her smile as she asked the heroine what she had called her. Madame guessed that she was probably having trouble recognizing her as the mistress of this house. Cinderella staggered in surprise because she guessed what Melissa was really trying to do, to provoke her mother into conflict. Mrs. Lopez, approaching the protagonist, said that a person can endure a lot, and even though she was her father's second wife, she still bore him an heir. Getting closer to Ellen's face, the stepmother added that her dead mother was not able to look after the family because she was not quite right in the head. Pointing her finger at the worker, the woman exclaimed that she should at least be grateful that she had not been kicked out. The heroine said that she thought that she wanted Melissa to return the books because she hoped to introduce her to the royal librarian. The stepmother irritably asked the girl how she dared to contradict her, but she stated that she had not finished her sentence. Eleanor continued speaking, reminding everyone that she was also part of the Lopez family and that she was not someone who was taken off the streets. But before the main character could finish speaking, her stepmother slapped her with all her might. The girl silently fell to the floor, and Madame calmly began to talk about how she really was the Marquise's daughter and that Helen and Melissa belonged to her ex-husband. The wicked lady asked Cinderella if that was what she was trying to tell them, to which she, covering her reddened cheek, stated that it was not so. The worker received a second blow to the face, from which she also staggered and fell to the floor. Shaking with fear, Eleanor listened to her stepmother tell her that she apparently wanted to become a cripple and that she should not strive for something that was beyond her reach. Having thrown a book on the floor in front of the unfortunate woman, the mistress of the house ordered her to go to the library immediately. Mrs. Lopez mockingly told her stepdaughter that if she was lucky, she would catch the eye of some royal librarian. The protagonist soon arrived at the right address. The building looked more like a luxurious theater than the royal library. Cinderella, walking with difficulty because of a broken ankle, which caused passers-by to look at her, thought that she would not get better if she did not rest. The girl glanced at the cloudy sky, where lightning flashed. She was upset by the fact that, on top of everything else, it was about to rain. Upon entering the library, Eleanor successfully returned the book to the librarian, after which she bowed, preparing to leave. But then the man asked her to stay a little longer, and the lady turned to him. The book depository worker told Milady that she had a broken ankle, then asked if she had walked all the way, to which she said yes. Having handed the worker a few coins, the librarian told her to call a carriage for herself for this money, because if she went on foot, she would get worse. Eleanor was very surprised and said that she could not accept this money, but the man began to convince her that she would soon be caught in the rain with her sore leg. While convincing the gentleman that she was okay, the heroine accidentally turned around, but suddenly noticed something that made her heart stop. Two richly dressed men appeared in the library, and the girls around them, seeing them, began to whisper among themselves with smiles. As it turned out, the gentleman who attracted the attention of all the ladies was Enoch Byron himself. Warren, walking to the book depository, told his friend that after he donated a lot of money to renovate the library, he never came to see it. The boy considered this inhumane, since in his situation, he would come here every day. But Enoch continued to remain silent. The chief thief of women's hearts recalls that a year has already passed since the War of Atrios ended. As Warren had said, he donated a large sum to the renovation of the Royal Library, which surprised some people, given that the country was at war. However, having won the war and successfully restored the book depository, Byron became a national hero. Entering the luxurious building, the Marquis told his friend that the head of the library must be jumping for joy because he was able to rebuild it so luxuriously, and even during the war. But Enoch, looking around the room, sighed in disappointment and thought that the old man in charge of the building had such vulgar taste. The Duke's thoughts were occupied by the fact that the old man had rebuilt the library, making it look like a temple, no doubt to keep Atreus in fear. Warren spoke excitedly about what if the Atreus wanted to start a war over the library again, arguing that they were fanatics. Suddenly, Enoch, looking at his friend with a frighteningly piercing gaze, said that they were so weak that they resorted to black magic. The embarrassed Marquis decided to tell his friend what the weekly gossip magazines had written about him. The friend asked with whom, meaning Penelope, but Warren was stunned to say that the newspapers were all about him and the mysterious lady he danced with at the ball. The Duke said indifferently that he was not interested in the girl at all, but then his friend asked why he had chosen her among all of them. Before answering the question, Enoch noticed something unusual out of the corner of his eye. He caught a slight movement behind the column he was passing. The young man smiled, having guessed who might be hiding there from him. He said with a smile that sometimes he wanted something unusual. Warren asked if he meant that he considered himself fickle, to which he said something like that. But then Enoch, stepping forward, decided that he had had enough of this nonsense, and then announced that he was leaving. His agitated friend asked him what had come over him, and, begging him to wait a little, chased after him. Only when the men moved away was the main character, who had been hiding behind a column all this time, able to come out. The girl looked thoughtfully after the guys, not finding the strength to smile. Ellen managed to escape from the library unnoticed, or so she thought, but as soon as she stepped outside, she was immediately caught in a pouring rain. As she quickly descends the stairs, the girl cannot believe that the weather has become so bad, because she might catch a cold if she continues walking like this. Coughing from the cold, the main character suddenly noticed a young mother with a child, whom she happened to be passing by, and immediately remembered that her mother died on a rainy day just like today. The protagonist recalls how, as a very little girl, she looked at her mother's coffin with confusion and could not accept what was happening. These thoughts brought tears to Eleanor's eyes. She raised her face to him and asked her mother why she had left her. But suddenly, the voice of a man who appeared nearby made Cinderella emerge from her thoughts. It was Enoch, who, soaking wet in the rain, but not without his sly smile, told the girl that she was the owner of the worn-out shoe. She was quite taken aback by the gentleman's appearance, and asked him what he was doing there. The Duke, approaching her, asked why she was asking him such questions if she herself was there for some reason. The man whispered to the beauty that the friend he was with had left him, then asked if she was the one hiding behind that column, since hiding was not her strong point. Byron, watching the heroine tremble before him, thought that she looked like a cowardly victim before a predator. The young man, having examined my lady's legs, said that she had, in fact, twisted her ankle. Not having waited for an answer from the coward, Enoch leaned even closer to the lady and asked if she was going to answer him. But suddenly, he grabbed the girl by the shoulder and led her to the road, where he stopped a passing carriage for them in time. The surprised heroine asked what it all meant, but the Duke silently threw her into the carriage, where she landed on a soft seat. Following her into the carriage, a young gentleman entered and told the worker that she was talking after all. The man asked Eleanor if she had a house, and when she answered that she did, he pointed his finger at the coachman, hinting that she should tell him the address. The protagonist had to take a deep breath and accept everything. She asked the driver to take her to 11 Heverington Street. The carriage, cutting through the dim city streets through the pouring rain, arrived at the appointed place. Enoch asked his interlocutor how a maid like her had gotten into the ball. She laughed at his words and said she was allowed in because of her hard work. The man suddenly declared that for a simple maid, attending a ball was not quite her thing. The girl said she couldn't pass up such an opportunity, as it was a once-in-a-lifetime one. The gentleman asked if it was worth it. Mr. Byron, bending his body towards the lady, asked if she wanted to know why he had decided to dance with her. She, thinking that the Duke was starting to irritate her, replied that she simply felt sorry for me. A subtle smile appeared on the man's face, and he told the girl that she knew her place. Ellen looked at his lordship in bewilderment and thought that he was making fun of her. But then the worker was slightly surprised when the young man asked her if she was sure that she had no hope. The main character was completely stunned when the gentleman asked if she expected anything more when she danced with him at the ball. The protagonist guessed that Enoch was testing her and wanted to see if she had succumbed to his charms, because any lady would have high hopes in such a situation. But Cinderella decided she was no longer the naive, doe-eyed girl. She lowered her indifferent gaze and smiled. This reaction of Milady greatly surprised the Duke, who expected completely different actions from her. Meanwhile, the carriage was already approaching the desired address, the main character's house, after which it stopped. Eleanor, deciding that she had better get out of the carriage before things got worse, stood up and thanked Byron for the ride, hurrying to leave as quickly as possible. But then Lucy the cat ran up to the carriage and saw her beloved owner in the window of the vehicle. The animal, imagining how the girl would joyfully greet and pet her, happily rubbed its muzzle against the leg of the horse that was tied to the carriage. The ungulate was very frightened by the animal that suddenly appeared under its feet, jumped up and growled, which shocked the coachman. This caused the carriage to shake, and the protagonist, who had not yet managed to get out, lost her balance and fell to the ground with a frightened scream. But suddenly, the girl manages to land successfully, right on his lordship's lap, leaning her hands on the seat above his shoulders. Enoch smirked, looked the main character straight in the eyes, and said that she was simply something. Cinderella was drenched in sweat and was so confused that she couldn't utter a word. The lady said irritably that it had not happened on purpose, and the man, holding my lady by the waist, asked with a smile if she felt embarrassed. Eleanor looked away with a blush on her cheeks and said that she had been embarrassed from the very beginning, but it was not intentional. Suddenly, the Duke grabbed the lady by the forearm with his other hand, pulling her even closer to him. There were only a couple of centimeters left between the faces of the main character and his lordship, and the latter, with a sly smile, said that he didn't think so. The protagonist, embarrassed by the fact that their faces were almost touching, moved away from the man and indignantly repeated that it was an accident. The girl apologized to the gentleman and asked him to let her leave quickly, but he did not remove his hand from her waist for a long time. Nevertheless, Enoch released Milady, spreading his arms out to the sides as if nothing had happened. Before leaving, Cinderella modestly thanked the Duke for giving her a ride, then said that she would definitely repay him. He grinned and, without taking his eyes off the commoner, said that she really thought he only wanted money. But then he rose from his seat and approached the lady, asking how she would repay him. Eleanor said she would give him the money. The young gentleman, taking the girl by the chin, suddenly asked her to bring the money herself. The stunned heroine asked what he meant. The Duke told Cinderella that she knew his address, then repeated that she needed to bring the money herself and not send it by mail. After this, his lordship told Milady that she could go, and the protagonist quickly found herself outside. The hard worker walked to the threshold of the house, not even suspecting that her stepsister had been watching her the whole time. Harton was very surprised when she saw that their maid had arrived home by carriage rather than on foot. As soon as Eleanor entered the house, her sister peppered her with questions about how she'd managed to get there by carriage without a penny in her pocket. She assumed the librarian had given her the money. The girl found it funny that the Marquis's daughter was begging for money to ride in a carriage. She, smiling and pointing her finger at the worker, asked her not to forget that men communicate with her out of pity and never take her seriously. As soon as the lady said that she could ruin their family's reputation, the main character turned to her and calmly said that nothing like that would happen. Cinderella went on about her business, only thinking about how Harton was insecure, while she was angry at her for such an answer. But then the protagonist meets another stepsister on her way, who greets her. Melissa, trying her best to act like a different, modest, kind girl, asked Ellen how her ankle was. The blonde was disgusted by this acting, so she walked past and asked her to go away. But suddenly, Harton, grabbing Cinderella by the scarf on her head, furiously asked where she was going, since Melissa had not yet finished talking to her. The embittered lady did not let the worker go and called her ungrateful, at which the other sister quietly giggled. But the very next moment, this hypocrite asked Harton to stop holding Elena's head because it was probably hurting her. She was surprised by her words and indignantly said that she was too soft-hearted. Throwing the said maid into her shabby room, the stepsister ordered her not to bother her anymore. Left alone in the room, the protagonist struggled to rise, leaning on her hands and holding back the tears that welled up. Sitting down in the same place where she fell, the girl thought that she was already tired of all this. Night had fallen, but the rain outside still continued. Cinderella sat on the bed with the cat, staring at the wall and thinking about her own thoughts. Remembering how Enoch had flirted with her, she remembered that he had said that he had only danced with her out of pity, and that was why she did not want to get involved with him. Looking out at the rain pouring outside the window, the girl thought that, frankly speaking, she could have sent the money by courier. But she changed her mind. Perhaps the main character was touched by the way he searched for her in the rain. Cinderella looked away in embarrassment, thinking that she was sure that she was heading straight into a trap and was acting like an idiot. The next day, the stepmother, leaving her husband's office where she had a conversation with him, promises him that she will do everything as he said. But suddenly, Margot was overcome with rage, all because of her hated stepdaughter. Everything had changed since she found herself in the royal library. The lady of the estate is perplexed by how Ellen dared to go to her father and say that she needed rest until her ankle recovered. Mrs. Lopez doesn't understand why her husband has suddenly taken on the role of a loving father, as he doesn't even seem interested in what's going on in the house. She suspects his daughter is using him for her own ends. Since Cinderella was holed up in the attic due to her sore leg, forgetting about her duties around the house, the stepmother had to spend money to hire a servant. Nervously biting her nails, the woman thinks that she should have gotten rid of this devil when she had the chance. A daughter of marriageable age is a great asset to any noble family, and in this regard, Eleanor has more to offer than Helen and Melissa. Although the heroine is a true aristocrat with Lopez blood in her veins, her stepmother doesn't consider her a beauty. However, men can't take their eyes off her. The Baroness understands that her two daughters must find good matches, if only she had someone who could rid her of this thorn in her stepdaughter's side. With these thoughts, Mom was going down the stairs, but suddenly, she heard someone on the first floor calling out to her excitedly. It turned out to be her son Anthony, who was not in the best shape. His face was covered in bruises, and he was holding his stomach with his hand. The mother ran up to the boy, grabbed him by the shoulders, and asked what had happened to him and why his face was in such a state. He, trembling with fear, admitted that he seemed to have big problems. The woman was about to go to the showdown, promising that she would get to those people who did this to her heir, but Anthony suddenly stopped her. The boy, drenched in sweat and without looking up, asked his mother not to do this. The stepmother's heart sank when her son confessed that he had lost at the gaming table and was now in huge debt to Viscount Zelen. The young man said that he only wanted to play a couple of games, but before he could even realize it, everything led to him losing, for which he was beaten. Mrs. Lopez, meanwhile, recalls that Viscount Zelenom is known for his bad reputation. He and his gang will do anything for money. Anthony fell to his knees in front of his mother, tearfully asking what he should do now. But the woman didn't pay any attention to him because she was consumed by fear and the thought that she was tired of constantly being in debt. The stepmother's name is Margot Losbol, and she is the daughter of a hairdresser. Her family consisted of commoners mired in poverty. One day, they accumulated debts, and, to avoid poverty, Margot married Walter Dusoli, who was just an old beggar. Soon after this, she became pregnant, and her husband, when the labor began, hurriedly ran into her bedroom, wondering when the baby would arrive. But the wife, giving birth to her first child, really did not want him to take after her husband, whom she terribly hated. The woman in labor, just remembering Walter's disgusting face, wished even more that this would not happen. Soon the baby was born, and the servants began to prepare everything necessary for the young mother. Helen was born, and, as her mother wanted, she turned out to be very beautiful and was not at all like her father. However, while Margot was delighted with the baby's arrival, her father was disappointed with her. He said that she had nothing but her attractiveness. Over time, the woman became pregnant with a second child, and after giving birth, the maid told the father that it was a girl again. Walter had hoped to have a son, but upon hearing this, he slapped his wife on the cheek and called her useless, adding that in that case, she could come up with a name for her second daughter herself. After this, the man left as if nothing had happened, and the maid anxiously asked Margot what she should do. She looked at her daughter and realized that she had not inherited her appearance at all. The mother lay down on the bed indifferently, telling the maid that the girl's name should be Melissa. She didn't say anything else, to which the maid, looking at her, sighed sadly. Now the stepmother believes that perhaps this is why she concentrated her attention on Helen, who was more like her. 1. But Melissa, instead of inheriting her genes, grew up looking like her paternal aunt. Margot's husband's sister told her that her brother was quite cruel and that he should take better care of his wife and the state of the house. A slight chuckle came from the lady as she told the young mother that she had a lot of worries. Mrs. Losbol was angry that this lady dared to lord it over her, although she was as common as her brother, and the only thing she had was a husband from a wealthy family. Little Melissa, who had been hugging her aunt all this time, was very scared when she saw how her mother's hands were shaking with rage. But then Margot, putting on a welcoming smile, asked her relative if she would like to have a cup of tea with her. She led the guest away, smiling sarcastically, because a plan had formed in her head. After the death of her husband, all property and real estate would pass into her hands. Then one day, a knight who arrived at the Losbol house informs his wife that her husband is now in prison, having been arrested for fraud. Returning home, Mom was overcome with panic. What other fraud had Walter been arrested for, and what would happen to their property? But Margot was terrified when she thought about what would happen to her and her daughters. Soon after, victims of her husband's fraud showed up on her doorstep. Their family was sued for damages. A mother and 2 daughters, hiding in the corridor, trembled, listening to the angry cries of people asking for the return of the stolen money. As a result, the stepmother abandoned the idea of inheriting the property and paid off the victims of his actions, leaving herself without a penny in her pocket. The exhausted woman, tired of these problems, silently read her husband's death certificate. After throwing away the document, she called her ex-husband a useless old man, then took her 2 daughters by the hands and led them out of the estate. Margot came to the deceased's sister for help, but she indifferently said that she sincerely sympathized with her, but she could not stay in her house all the time, because her husband and family were not very happy about it. While drinking tea, the girl asked the mother of 2 children why she didn't go to the kitchen and help the maids clean up there. The widow was angered by her aunt's words, that it would be better for her to send her children to a boarding school run by novices, since it would be better for them. After that conversation, Miss Losbol, walking down the street, thought that she did not want to send her daughters to a boarding school run by nuns. She knows that the future of such students is doomed. At best, they will become governesses, but most become maids or novices. Margot is very worried about this because she did not raise her children so that they would spend the rest of their lives as a servant or a nun. But then the girl is pulled out of her thoughts by a passerby, who, having accidentally collided with another man, ordered him to be more careful and watch the road. The angry gentleman went on about his business, but the young lady noticed something unusual. He was grinning strangely. After this, the widow saw how a little boy took an expensive watch out of the pocket of another innocent man, but Margot stopped him. The unsuspecting man turned out to be the Marquis of Lopez. He turned around at the noise and saw that a boy had stolen his watch. Finally, the thief realized that he would not be able to steal the jewel and, giving up his attempts, ran away. Margot, with a venomous smile, showed the man his watch and said that she had managed to prevent it from being stolen. The Marquis, having taken a table in the cafe with the red-haired stranger, thanked her for protecting his family heirloom. She asked how he, a nobleman, had ended up in this area in the first place. The man replied that he had simply come here to find a cure for the mental illness that his wife suffered from. These words interested the girl in no small way, and she then listened to the gentleman more attentively. Lopez shared that they had contacted various doctors, but were unable to find him, which is how he ended up in this area. She sympathized. But then the Marquis, looking at his watch, quickly stood up and said that it was time for him to go, and the widow understood this. The man, leaving his business card on the table, told the stranger that she could contact him for any reason. He wanted to thank her for her help. Suddenly, Margot, reaching out to pick up the business card, touched the gentleman's hand with her fingertips. Gracefully squeezing the business card between her fingers, the lady thanked the gentleman with a sly look. The Baron went out into the street to his carriage, and the girl who remained sitting at the table watched him through the window. She was still haunted by the tantalizing thought that Lopez had said his wife was crazy. The mother recalls that the Lopez family is not going through its best times now, but it remains noble since the Marquis works in the diplomatic department of the royal palace. Margot smiled creepily, thinking that this man would be a better husband than Walter. She wouldn't let Lopez leave. After all, he'd mentioned his wife was sick. The woman was very happy that luck was on her side and laughed, causing those around her to look at her with horror, as if she were crazy. One day, the widow met the Marquis at his home, sat on his lap, and said she missed him. He smiled and said he missed her too. The lady asked if there was any risk of his wife noticing them, and the gentleman replied that she had left with their daughter, which he was very glad about, as her condition was getting worse. The man sighed heavily and admitted he wanted to find a way to deal with his wife's madness. At that moment, Margot had an idea. She leaned towards the Marquis's ear and whispered that she might have a good solution, then asked if he wanted to know what it was. Immediately after this, the widow looked at the same servant with the burnt face, who brought them tea as if nothing had happened. The mother recalls a recent conversation between this servant and her colleague. The latter is surprised that she remained working in this palace after being burned. Having overheard this, Margot only grinned and, not paying any attention to it, went on about her business. But now, without sliding off the Baron's lap and smilingly taking the cup in her hands, she says that the plan she has conceived should work. She throws a cup of hot tea right at the feet of the maid with the mutilated face, causing her to fall to the floor with a deafening scream. But the widow, grabbing the frightened girl by the chin, told the Baron that there was a way to take care of his wife without staining their hands with blood. Shortly after these events, Margot was heading to her new lover's house with her daughters. The Baroness had died, and she and her children were able to begin a new life. The woman smiles frighteningly, realizing that this is all thanks to Petra Raman, Eleanor's mother, whose madness allowed the widow to become Baroness Lopez. A whole year passed since these events. One sunny day, the stepmother's daughters teased little Elena by pulling her hair in the hallway. But suddenly, the poor thing, whose tears had already started to well up, froze because she heard the crying of a baby coming from the room. It turned out that on that day, Margot gave birth to her third child, this time by the Marquis. The father took his son in his arms and asked his mother if he was happy. Lopez told his wife with a smile that she was a great woman for giving birth to his heir. The man then turned to his maids and ordered them to take care of the Baroness, or face punishment. They bowed obediently and accepted the order. The Baron, handing the child over to his mother, suggested naming him Anthony, and the woman said it was a wonderful name. Lopez wanted a male successor, and with Anthony's birth, Margot was able to cement her position as Baroness. Anthony is her pride and joy, and so now, when he's caught up in debt problems, she can't give him up. She asks her son not to worry. Mom promised to find a way to get the money, but the guy, trembling with fear that they only had a month, asked if they could do it in that time. Suddenly, his stepmother shouted at him to pull himself together because he was the heir of Baron Lopez and should not allow these thoughts to upset him. Having calmed down a little, Margot, with her eyes wide open, added that they would find a way and asked her son to promise that he would stop gambling. He, still shaking, said that he would never touch them again. The Baroness wanted some privacy, sat down on the living room sofa, and became lost in thought. She couldn't believe her son had gotten into gambling debt. Nervously biting her fingernail, she thought that Viscount Zelen and his gang had forced her to do this, and they might cut off Anthony's hand if he didn't pay everything. Just then a maid comes into the room and tells her mistress that a letter has arrived for her. Taking the envelope in her hands, the stepmother saw that it was a telegram from Robert Anderson, the count she had met at the ball. She opened the letter, not even imagining what this man wanted. But then, as soon as the stepmother read the text, she immediately laughed like a psychopath, which really scared the maid. In the letter, Anderson states that he has fallen in love with Ellen, who was at the ball. He is a widower, but is willing to offer a huge sum of money in exchange for her daughter's hand in marriage. Smiling frighteningly, Margot thought that everyone knew what a pervert Robert was, but this offer made her incredibly happy. The stepmother always knew that her stepdaughter, who no one needed, would one day be useful to her. Meanwhile, the main character, with her head raised, looked around the area she found herself in with her mouth open. To repay the debt to the Duke, she came to the royal castle, which was striking in its scale and luxury. Her escort, coughing disapprovingly, asked the lady not to stare and to follow him. She sheepishly agreed. The girl gazed at everything in admiration. The palace turned out to be more beautiful than she had imagined, and now the lady understood why it was considered an ice castle. As soon as the guest found herself inside the palace, she heard the whispering of the maids behind her. Ellen looked around in confusion, realizing that her appearance had caused the entire staff to be confused. The young lady had come to visit her master. The heroine's father gave her some money to go to the doctor, and she could have called a carriage, but she didn't, so she showed up at the palace all tired. The worker did this because she wanted to save this amount, and besides, her ankle does not hurt so much. Now she is not at all embarrassed by these stares and gossip about her, because she has been through much worse things. Finally, Cinderella, accompanied by the butler, arrived at the appointed office. The servant knocked and told his lordship that a girl had arrived. Ellen stood to the side, waiting to see what would happen. Enoch allowed the lady to enter, after which the doors opened, and the guest saw the Duke, who was sitting on the sofa with a smile, sipping a strong drink. Suddenly, the doors behind Ellen closed sharply, causing her to become frightened and embarrassed. Still, trying to overcome her shyness, she remained standing, mentally begging not to be left alone with this man. Enoch, leaning his body forward, asked Milady why she was standing there, after which he invited her to come to him. She sighed, thinking that the Duke was very arrogant. She believed that the gentleman was like that because he had been bossing people around all his life. The protagonist obeyed his lordship and moved closer to him. Enoch, folding his arms across his chest and raising an eyebrow in surprise, asked the girl why she wasn't sitting down. Milady replied that there was no need for that, since she had come to return his money for the trip. But before Ellen could finish speaking, the gentleman, casting an angry glance at her, ordered her to sit down immediately. The heroine sighed, sat down on the sofa, and then thanked the young man for helping her get home. Cinderella wanted to hand the man a bag of money that she owed, but he suddenly took out a single coin from there. Smiling, he looked at the 5-kopeck coin and asked the worker if she thought he had called her here only for this coin. Enoch threw the kopeck on the floor, and Eleanor watched in amazement as it rolled away. Then the girl was even more taken aback when Enoch suddenly stood up and grabbed her chin in his hand. Looking down at the embarrassed worker, the Duke asked if she worked at the Lopez residence. Hearing this, the main character realized that the master still considered her a servant, although in fact, she was a legitimate member of the family. His lordship asked if she would mind working for him instead, saying that she would be better paid there, and he was sure she did not want to work for someone who treated her badly. The protagonist reflected that it would be a tempting offer for her if she really worked as a servant for Baron Lopez. The girl's head was suddenly visited by the thought of whether this man still felt pity for her, but she decided that, in any case, she no longer wanted him to look down on her the way others did. Gently removing the gentleman's hand from herself, the main character said that she would rather stay at the Lopez residence. Enoch scratched his head in surprise and asked the lady if she was a masochist, if she enjoyed being treated like a slave. The lady, rising from the sofa, said that she had her own reasons for this and that it was time for her to go. Bowing her head before the gentleman, the girl thanked him for the pity he had shown her at the ball and for his help in the library. Then Ellen turned to leave, her wheat-colored hair flowing gracefully through the air, making her seem even more beautiful. The Duke seemed enchanted by this moment. He just stood and looked at the commoner. As if nothing had happened, the heroine approached the door and touched the handle. However, before Milady could get out, Enoch, approaching her from behind, blocked the door with his hand. The girl asked what was going on. The young gentleman, touching Cinderella's shoulder with his fingers, said he wasn't finished yet. The Duke reminded her that, as she had said, she didn't want to work as a maid, then asked if she was interested in other work. The protagonist, overcome with excitement, said that it was not that important to her. But Enoch continued. She would receive 60,000 rupees a month in exchange for becoming his plaything. The man asked if she was interested now. The young man took a step forward, causing their bodies to now press closely together. Bending down to the girl's ear, the gentleman whispered that, if she hadn't realized it yet, he was inviting her to become his mistress. Looking at Cinderella from behind, Enoch thought that she was quite interesting. She rejected his offer to hire her as a maid. The Duke thinks the heroine looks like she's about to collapse at any moment, yet she remains so cold. He wants to observe her more closely. The man wants to see Cinderella break under his influence. He puts his arm around her waist and asks her what she thinks of his proposal. The heroine, removing the man's hand from her waist, wanted to address him informally at first, but corrected herself in time, switching to a respectful form of speech. The girl turned to him and asked him how often he had mistresses, without even knowing their names first. His lordship was taken aback and asked Milady what her name was, and she introduced herself, thinking that he had been walking for a long time up to this point. Enoch sighed silently, because he couldn't believe that some nameless girl had turned his head. The protagonist said that she had no idea how to behave modestly, how to spend money, and had no experience in bed, so she could not be a concubine. Eleanor imagined herself in this role, richly dressed, laden with jewelry. She asked the gentleman if he thought this was a good idea. He, placing his hand on the door, said that she didn't need to pretend to be modest, and, besides, the more you spend, the more you get used to it. Milady became agitated and shook her head, but the Duke, squeezing her chin with his fingers, turned her towards him. Looking the beauty in the eyes, the young man added that as for what happens in the bedroom, she doesn't need to make any effort, because he will teach her everything. The gentleman and the commoner stood frozen opposite each other, their lips ready to meet in a kiss at any moment. But suddenly there was a knock on the door, and the embarrassed Cinderella shuddered in fear. His lordship sighed in irritation and asked what was wrong, to which the servant on the other side of the door replied that Lady Arkwood had arrived to see him. The Duke stepped back, leaving the heroine standing by the aisle. He angrily asked why she was there, and his subordinate replied that she had urgent business. Suddenly, the doors behind Ellen opened, and a joyful Penelope greeted the Duke. But then, besides Enoch, who greeted her with a stern gaze, the lady saw a certain girl. The mistress inquired who it was. Mr. Byron, clenching his jaw, told his guest that she could go, and that his offer still stood. The main character obeyed, silently walked around Penelope, and walked towards the exit. Her Grace, looking after her in bewilderment, wondered what had just happened. She sensed a strange atmosphere. Then the girl entered the room and saw Enoch, frowning, lighting his pipe. Penelope was surprised that he still hadn't quit smoking and asked him to at least think about the health of his lungs. The man, continuing to enjoy his tobacco, asked Lady Arkwood to leave, as he had not invited her there. The girl, throwing an irritated glance at him, said that they hadn't even started the conversation, and he was already so nasty. Sitting down on the sofa, Penelope asked her friend who the girl was, since she had not seen her before in his palace. The Duke wanted to say that it was none of her business, but the lady suddenly cried out that this commoner was very similar to the lady with whom he danced at the ball. Enoch begged her to finally stop and asked why she had come. She called him a fool and placed a document on the table, a marriage contract. The young man asked what she meant by that. The lady said that they are both under pressure to get married, and she wants them to pretend to be married and then separate after 3 years. With a coquettish wink, the young lady added that she would be happy to give him a child if he wished. He would become the next Duke of Arkwood. Enoch, barely holding back his anger, thought that this lady had completely lost her mind. He said they wouldn't do that, to which Penelope indignantly asked why not, if that was the only way to get rid of her parents. The girl then asked the man if he wanted his own successor, but the Duke firmly stated that he would never marry her or anyone else. Then the lady asked with a grin whether it was not because of that lady who had just left, and said that she did not know that he liked such girls. Her ladyship wondered aloud if Enoch really liked commoners in trouble, but he angrily asked her to stop talking nonsense and leave. But suddenly, Lady Arkwood's question made the Duke start. She asked whether he would agree if she asked him to marry her. He grinned and asked why he had to do that at all. Immediately after his words, Penelope's ringing laughter was heard. The lady told her friend that she felt sorry for the girl who would marry him and spend the rest of her life with him. The lady smiled sweetly, but taunted the man with the phrase that he only had a pretty face. After this, Madame turned around, telling his lordship that she would finally leave him alone for today. The girl headed for the exit, but, pausing at the door, added that she hoped that one day the day would come when he would regret his arrogance. Turning to the man with a smile, she asked him to remember her words. When this day melts away, it will laugh in his face. The young man didn't answer, but just smoked his pipe, fixing his frightening gaze on her. Throwing his cigarette on the floor, Enoch ordered his servant to prepare hunting equipment for him. Having saddled his horse, the young gentleman rode at full speed into the forest with a gun in his hands. As soon as the horned game appeared from the bushes, the man took aim with his rifle, after which a deafening shot rang out. The butler, stopping in front of the king's desk, informs him that Enoch has refused to collect the game he was hunting and has caused a commotion. His Highness is disappointed that his brother is doing this again. He is the kingdom's finest soldier, but he sometimes goes too far. Of course, this is precisely the reason why he is so popular among the people of Freydon, but his brother cannot allow this to continue. Hounds need to be kept on a leash to prevent them from biting their owner's hand, so Henry believes marriage would be the perfect leash for Enoch. The ruler asked the servant to send a message to Marquis Philo because they must hurry with the wedding. The subordinate clarified that he was certain he wanted to contact the Marquis, not Penelope. The king remained silent, and the butler said he would do as he was told. The gentleman rose from his chair, thinking that he needed Philon to keep Enoch under control, since marriage was a bargaining tool for the nobility. Looking out the window, Henry hopes that Enoch understands this, and that it will be better for both of them. The main character lies calmly on the bed with her pet, looking at the ceiling. The girl remembers the moment when Enoch, pressed against her from behind, asks with a smile what she thinks about his proposal. Turning over onto her other side, Eleonora felt embarrassed because she still couldn't get it out of her head. She tries to think about something else, but she can't forget that moment when their lips almost touched. The worker was infuriated by all this, and jumping out of bed, she screamed at these memories to leave her alone. The protagonist locked herself in her room to avoid running into her family. A walk was out of the question. But then Cinderella heard someone knocking on her door. She rose from her bed and asked who it was. It turned out to be the stepmother, who told her stepdaughter that they needed to talk. Opening the door, Eleonora looked at Margot's face in bewilderment and asked what was the matter. She, oddly enough, smiled and happily said that they needed to take a walk somewhere. The heroine immediately suspected something was wrong, because usually her stepmother pulls her hair when she is relaxing in her room, like today. The woman added that they needed to go to a fitting at the boutique, then asked her daughter to get ready for the trip, as they had to return before dinner. The protagonist said that she did not understand anything, when suddenly the Baroness warmly took her hands and said that she was already in the prime of life, and it was time to get married. Ellen couldn't believe her ears. Her jaw dropped. She asked, stunned, what it meant. Later, Cinderella, looking at her reflection in the mirror, wonders why Margot suddenly started talking about marriage, and in all seriousness. The girl recalls how the Baroness said that now she would often appear in high society, and she was not allowed to walk around like that. Milady can't shake the feeling there's a catch. Her family doesn't have enough money to provide her with a dowry, so this isn't the best option. Although Eleanor doesn't know why she is being rushed into marriage, she decides that no matter what, she will hope that her future husband will be normal. She'll be fine until her chosen one turns out to be someone like Count Anderson. Suddenly, the stepmother burst into the room with Helen, who asked Ellen why she was taking so long to get ready. She immediately ran to them. Soon the Lopez family's carriage arrived in the city, on one of the most beautiful streets. Ellen was surprised to realize they had arrived at the capital's most famous boutique, a popular spot among young and wealthy women. The young worker never thought that she would ever cross the threshold of this place. Margot asked the girl if she was worried about the prices, then said that she shouldn't worry since her deceased mother left her some money. Cinderella looked at her stepmother with puzzlement, thinking that it turned out that her father was hiding the inheritance that her mother left since she never knew about it. Ellen's mother didn't leave her much, but her father took the money from his daughter, saying he needed it to manage the estate, and her stepmother and Helen took what was left. The only thing the protagonist has left behind as an inheritance is a necklace with a white topaz and a tattered diary written in a different language. She also inherited a precious box from her mother. There's no key, and no matter how hard she tries to open it, she's unsuccessful. Cinderella remembers how her mother, when giving her this box, said that she should not show it to anyone, and it would be better to hide it so that no one would find it. The woman stroked her daughter's cheek and added that she could only open it if she found herself in a difficult situation. Now the girl recalls that her mother often flew into a rage, but at that moment, when she said that it was her gift, she seemed like herself. Ellen wondered why she had told her this, but then her stepmother called out to her, asking her not to be in the clouds and to walk faster. The young ladies entered the store and stopped near the stand with elegant dresses. Margot pulled out an elegant red dress and showed it to her stepdaughter, admiringly saying that it suited her very well. But the main character was embarrassed because she did not share the Baroness's opinion. For her, this dress looked too pretentious. Suddenly, a wealthy lady entered the boutique and, upon seeing the Lopez women, exclaimed in surprise. It turned out to be Iris Philoane, who, noticing Eleanoia, asked what brought her there. Cinderella wanted to say hello, but suddenly Margot cried out at the top of her voice how good it was for Iris to come here. Ms. Philoane told the woman she hadn't known she was there, that they hadn't seen each other in a while, and that she hoped she was well. She smiled and said yes. The Baroness invited the sweet lady to sit down somewhere and talk, to which she agreed, after which the stepmother, forgetting about her stepdaughter, left. Having taken a table, Iris was surprised that she had brought Ellen here instead of Helen and Melissa. The girl asked if anyone had asked for her hand in marriage, to which she replied that not quite, but the Baron was eager to woo her. Ms. Philoane glanced sideways at Ellen when the woman said her stepdaughter needed new evening dresses because she couldn't wear the same ones. Meanwhile, the heroine was looking at the assortment of clothes, but the young lady could notice the sleeve of her shirt, which really did look worn. The stepmother happily asked the girl if she was by any chance planning a wedding with Count Vantes, adding that they were a wonderful couple. She smiled shyly and said that no, they were just childhood friends, and their parents were just joking about marriage. Margot laughed and said it was very sweet, while Ellen, to whom she was completely oblivious, looked embarrassed. Iris, smiling modestly, shared with the Baroness that the truth was that her family had discussed marriage with another family. The protagonist, hearing this, pricked up her ears, and Margot asked what kind of family this was. Philoane whispered to the woman that it was a secret that should remain only between them, then said that they were discussing the matter of marriage with the Duke of Bayern. Eleanor suddenly flinched and turned back with her eyes wide and her mouth open. But suddenly, the worker, lowering her head, wondered why she was so surprised when she heard this. The girl understands that Iris was born into a respected noble family, and she is more worthy of becoming a duchess. Cinderella realizes that this matter does not concern her at all, but for some reason her hand is shaking, and she herself cannot contain her excitement. Margot jerked in shock and asked the lady if this was really so. She, putting her index finger to her lips, said that it would be better for her to remain silent until there was an official announcement. The stepmother, hiding her smile, offered Iris her congratulations, then admitted that she could not believe that Helen's friend would become the Duchess of Bayern. But then she tells Philoane that in order for her daughter to play the role of her close friend, she must find a good husband for her. The young lady confided in the woman that the Marquise of Philoane would soon be hosting a party, and she would like to invite her and her friend. The woman promised to inform her father. The Baroness was very pleased with this, saying that she would be very grateful. Iris said that when she became a duchess, she would like Helen to be with her, but Ellen, hearing this, realized that she was lying. The main character knows that Philoane does not consider her sister as his friend, she just needs someone to act as a maid of honor. Soon, stepmother and Iris finished their conversation, and the Lopez girls left the boutique, where the store owner politely said goodbye to them. Margot kept blabbering on about how this was the reason why this boutique was the most popular in the city, but the protagonist wasn't listening to her at all. Ellen assumes that the king decided to find a wife for his brother, but she didn't think it would happen so soon. The girl wondered whether Enoch even knew about her future engagement. But then her stepmother pulled her out of her thoughts, calling her sternly and saying that she had been daydreaming lately. The woman suggested that her daughter look into the shoe and jewelry store because she needed some of these items for new dresses. Eleonora thought she understood the need for new shoes, but not for jewelry. Her mother didn't save that much money for new trinkets. The protagonist became increasingly convinced that something was wrong. The girls then went to a jewelry store where they looked at some of the jewelry. Margot showed her stepdaughter a beautiful gold earring with a beautiful orange amber and asked her if she liked it. As soon as the main character looked at this jewel, Enoch's eyes, which were of the same rich color, immediately appeared in her memory. But Ellen suddenly felt embarrassed and wondered why she had remembered him so suddenly. She told her stepmother that she liked the pearls they had looked at earlier better. She raised an eyebrow and said that pearl jewelry made a girl look older than she actually was. The Baroness's words echoed in Ellen's head. She didn't think pure gold suited her anyway. The protagonist again remembered the intense gaze of Enoch's amber eyes and how he told her that he was offering her to become his lover. The hard worker thought sadly that her stepmother was right after all. It really didn't suit her. It was then that the woman and the commoner encountered their acquaintance Iris again. She looked at them in surprise and asked what they were doing there. Margot laughed at the coincidence that they had to meet again and wished her to find something she liked in the store, after which she said goodbye. Just as the heroine was about to leave, Philin called out to her and asked her to spare a minute. Iris, while choosing decorations on the table, told the commoner that she was sure she did not know much about high society. Taking the bracelet in her hand, she handed it to Ellen and asked why she didn't try it on, adding that she wouldn't find a husband looking like that. Cinderella felt awkward because she heard the servants whispering, laughing, comparing her to a pig that they decided to put a precious ornament on. Iris put the bracelet on Lopez's hand herself, saying that she hoped that she would meet her husband, but she jerked her hand and said that it was not worth it. Suddenly, Philowaine, looking angrily straight into my lady's eyes, asked her not to act like a fool. Then she, smiling frighteningly and squeezing the heroine's hand, asked her to accept this decoration from her as a gift. The day passed quickly, and Eleonora, getting ready for bed, decided to lie down on the bed and look at her new bracelet. She thought about how expensive this piece of jewelry was, and she was sure that Iris had given it to her with a hidden meaning, although perhaps this was typical of ladies. The worker recalls that Philowaine always treated her with contempt, but she would occasionally do good deeds for her, like today. She's filled with this. She believes in helping those in need. When Ellen was little, she thought she had good intentions. Cinderella was so absorbed in thinking about what a hypocrite Iris was that she didn't notice how the bracelet in her hand was stolen by someone who quickly passed by. It was her pet Lucy, who, in a fit of play, snatched the jewelry from her and held it in her teeth. Ellen immediately rushed to her, asking her to spit it out, as she might accidentally swallow it. But then the girl froze, because she heard the door in her room creak. Margot appeared in the doorway and angrily asked her daughter what she was doing at such a late hour when she had to get up early the next day. Having called the worker useless, the woman left, and the heroine just wanted to ask the cat to be quieter when she noticed that it had completely disappeared. The girl started looking for it around the room, but suddenly her toe touched a piece of the bracelet. Ellen managed to find Lucy in the closet, but she was horrified because the cat had torn apart her newly purchased bracelet. The owner, disappointed, said that's why she didn't want her to play with him. Milady began examining the animal's mouth, checking to make sure she hadn't swallowed anything. Fluffy didn't like the fact that someone was rummaging around in her mouth, so she started wagging her tail in displeasure, for which Cinderella apologized to him. But then the main character noticed what the cat's tail was hitting, her precious box. The girl picked up the item, thinking she'd completely forgotten about it. The hard worker became curious about what was inside. Looking at the expensive box, the heroine remembers that her mother could barely take care of herself because of her illness, and Ellen finds it hard to believe that she could leave her an inheritance. The protagonist shook the box, wondering if there might be money in it. Cinderella abruptly dropped the box, startling her cat. Milady realized that this was her inheritance, but she couldn't open it and find out what it was. The worker, seeing that Lucy's fur stood on end, stroked her and said that everything was fine. But then the main character remembered that if there was anything that was bothering her, it was one detail. In the past, she had asked her father about her mother's inheritance, saying that she had heard about it but did not know what to do with it. The man sighed wearily and told his daughter that she didn't have to worry because her stepmother would take care of it, which surprised her. The girl, putting the box back in the closet, thinks something's wrong. Margot has never shown such attention, and her father avoids the topic. Eleanor understands that only time will tell. It will reveal their true intentions, and perhaps even the contents of her box. The next day, another ball was held in the royal palace, which was attended by many noble gentlemen. The stepmother and Ellen also attended the event and were formally introduced by the butler. The latter felt uneasy, adjusting her new dress as she felt uncomfortable in it. The other guests at the banquet saw the Baroness, laughed, and began to discuss her among themselves. The woman was very angry that they dared to treat her like that and ignore her just because she was a commoner. Noticing that her stepdaughter was constantly adjusting her dress, Margot hit her hand with her fan and angrily ordered her to stop fidgeting. Mrs. Lopez reminded the girl that she needed to stand up straight like a proper lady, for which she apologized to her. But Ellen thought that her stepmother herself was not behaving like a real lady, swearing in all directions and powdering herself at every step. Looking at the jewelry she was wearing, Cinderella thought that she had never worn anything more beautiful and fashionable before. Following this, Milady remembered that she and her stepmother had arrived at the ball in a new carriage. As soon as the daughter saw the new vehicle, she asked her stepmother in bewilderment where it came from and whether she had received it along with her inheritance. She, smiling venomously, told the worker that her mother was the daughter of a rich merchant, so she left her a certain payment. Eleanor said that now everything was clear to her, but in fact it was not so, because on the contrary, it seemed strange to her. Now the protagonist reflects that her mother could never have left so much money, and even if she had, her father and wife would have already spent it. Suddenly, Margot, pointing somewhere to the side, suggests that her daughter go there because she wants to introduce her to someone. But when the heroine wanted to ask with whom, the woman, grabbing Ellen by the hand, said that they already knew each other and they needed to go quickly. Cinderella had no choice but to follow the Baroness, wondering who this man was that she had already met. 1. Finally, Mrs. Lopez stumbles upon the man she needs, Count Anderson, whom she joyfully calls out. He turns to them with a menacing grin. The man, his arms outstretched in happiness, walked towards them, telling the ladies that he was very glad to meet them. The Count leaned over to the young lady and asked if he could call her simply Eleanor. The old man's cheeks flushed, and he told the girl enthusiastically that he never thought she could look so good. The main character's hair stood on end when the man laughed and added that she was worth every cent he paid. The stepmother said that if there was one good thing about Eleanor, it was her looks. He licked his lips and agreed, because she looked even more gorgeous in that dress. Then the woman, noticing that her daughter was silent, said that she should come up and greet Anderson properly, since he spent a lot of money on her. Ellen, shaking with rage, clenched her hands into fists when her stepmother shouted that the Count had paid for the jewelry she was wearing, and she should be grateful. The girl looked at Margot with a cold gaze. Cinderella realized she was even more treacherous than she actually was. The protagonist clenched her jaw in anger, because her stepmother knew that she would refuse if she immediately took her to the Count and decided to make her a debtor, and even dared to use her mother as an excuse. Eleanor calmly told Anderson that he shouldn't do that, which left both the man and Mrs. Lopez dumbfounded. Throwing her jewelry on the floor, the girl added that if he had paid for her clothes and jewelry, she would have worn rags to the ball. The worker bowed to the Count, saying that, unfortunately, she did not want to be in his debt, so her stepmother would be happy to reimburse him for all expenses. The stepmother flared up with rage. She menacingly asked the girl how she dared to speak like that, but then Anderson indignantly told Margot that he thought they understood each other well, because she said that she had settled everything with Lady Eleanor. The man's screams drew the attention of people around him. He angrily asked the woman if she considered him a fool for daring to deceive him like that. The stepmother said that there was a misunderstanding and began to play to the audience. Madame asked her daughter why she was lying if she said that she loved the Count. The Baroness grabbed Ellen by the shoulders and began to shake her, ordering her to say at least something. But suddenly, the transparent veil that adorned the girl's shoulders fell to the floor due to the woman's sharp movements. The banquet guests, seeing this, were very surprised and began to whisper among themselves. Eleanor, trying to cover her cleavage, angrily asked her stepmother to stop, wondering where her manners had gone. Margot suddenly heard those around her talking about how they knew she would show her true colors again, and that she was simply lucky to have hooked up with a worthy nobleman. Enoch himself shows up at the event, perplexed as to why there is such a commotion here. His friend Warren immediately runs up to him and asks him where he was, since he missed all the drama. The Duke saw his friend's delighted face and asked why he was so pleased. Having led his friend closer to the scene of events, the Marquis asked him to look there, and Byron, irritated by his behavior, asked what was going on there. Warren, pointing his finger at Ellen, who was shivering with cold, asked if this was the lady with whom he had danced at the ball. The man looked at the girl in bewilderment and wondered what she was doing there. The gentleman already reflexively wanted to take off his jacket to cover Cinderella's shoulders with it, since she was essentially almost naked. But suddenly, he stopped short and froze, catching himself wondering what he wanted to do right now. Then, he decided to stay aside and light a cigar, thinking that it wasn't that he didn't care about this lady. He had no need to interfere. Watching the drama unfold, Warren tells a friend that it seems Anderson wanted Ellen to become his wife, but she knew nothing about it. Looking at the Baroness, who was trembling all over, the Marquis added that it seemed she was under pressure to force her stepdaughter to marry him. Enoch, smoking his cigar, realized that Baroness Lopez was the girl's stepmother. His lordship asked his friend if the blonde was a maid, to which the friend asked in surprise what he was talking about. The young duke immediately recalls the moment when Eleanor rejected his proposal, saying that she would rather stay at the Lopez residence. Enoch chuckled, thinking that this girl was the Baron's daughter, and yet she lied to him about working as a maid. The gentleman said with a satisfied smile that the situation was very interesting, to which his friend asked in fear what had suddenly come over him. Warren told his friend that Margot was the Baron's second wife, and that there was a notorious rumor circulating around him. The guy says he's talking about how someone saw this woman enter the Lopez residence the day after his first wife died. And before the end of the month, the Baron and Margot were married. It happened so quickly after the death of his first wife that everyone thought the man had gone mad. The Marquis added that this woman even brought children from a previous marriage. But Enoch suddenly asked what caused the death of his previous wife. Warren scratched his cheek in embarrassment, laughing that of all the amazing things he had told, Enoch had asked about this. He explains that the former Baroness Lopez was originally from Qatar. She was half Qatari, half Freudian. There was a rumor that Qatari women were prone to madness. The Marquis whispered in Enoch's ear that the girl was slowly going crazy and that they said she had committed suicide. His lordship realized that Cinderella's mother had taken her own life. Cinderella had been through so much at such a young age, and she had a nasty stepmother. The main character has no choice but to marry Count Anderson, and this does not concern the Duke himself. However, the man, who is finishing his cigar, still cannot shake off the strange feeling. Meanwhile, Anderson, swinging his hand at the unfortunate girl, angrily asked how she dared to mock him like that. The protagonist was already preparing to feel pain, but suddenly, someone stopped the Count, squeezing his hand. Enoch, covering the frightened lady with his jacket, asked what she was doing there anyway. Eleanor looked into the eyes of her savior, while he, lightly touching her hair, said that she did not warn that she would come. Silence reigned in the hall. The banquet guests, observing the situation from the sidelines, began spreading rumors that this lady was Mr. Byron's mistress. The main character froze in bewilderment, thinking that she had not expected such a turn of events at all. Anderson, rubbing his palm, looked at his would-be bride in bewilderment, while those around him chattered about Eleanor being the lady with whom the Duke had danced at the ball. The excited stepmother heard the nobles say that her stepdaughter was meeting with His Highness. This angered the woman, because she knew that everything was wrong, and Enoch would not even look at Ellen in a loving way, and she was simply lucky to dance with him. In order to find out everything as quickly as possible, she turned to the young man, saying that she wanted to tell him some news, but she didn't yet know if it was true. The protagonist and the Duke were stunned when the Baroness told the latter that he would soon be engaged to Lady Philowaine. Mr. Byron was filled with rage, because he realized that, apparently, his brother had some aces up his sleeve. However, he calmed his anger and looked softly at Cinderella, thinking that it was all a lie. The girl, shocked by her stepmother's words, also looked the man straight in the eyes. Enoch squeezed his fingers, in which he held the fragile hand of the Baron's daughter. Meanwhile, the guests gossiped about how they didn't believe Marquis Philowaine would agree to the engagement, and that now was not the right time for such news. How, as soon as Margot thought about what she had just done, the hair on her head stood on end with fear. Enoch, approaching her, sternly declared that he did not know anything of what he had heard from her, and therefore asked her to explain. The woman, trembling all over and stuttering on every word, muttered to the gentleman that this was not what she meant to say. The stepmother wondered if it was possible that Iris had lied to her about the engagement, something she could not believe. But then the Baroness remembers Philone's words, where she advises her to remain silent until there is an official announcement. Margot was no longer able to stand on her feet when she realized what a catastrophic mistake she had made. Madame rolled her eyes and fell to the floor unconscious, and a frightened Ellen called out to her. Later, 3 ladies, discussing the incident, say it was truly something to embarrass herself so publicly. One of them asks what happened to the Baroness after she fainted.